You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Radio MMT respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land from which we are broadcasting, the Wurundjeri people, and we are broadcasting to the Kulin Nations. Our focus is economics, that is, how stuff is produced and distributed. We recognise that for many tens of thousands of years, First Nations people's connection to country successfully embodied the world's oldest continuous economy, which was catastrophically disrupted by genocide and displacement. We acknowledge that we have much to learn to reshape our current extractive and exploitive system to achieve sustainable prosperity for everyone.
Radio MMT. Economics for the rest of us with Anne
and Kev.
Radio MMT.
Looking at the world through the lens of modern monetary theory.
Radio MMT. Macroeconomics for a well-being economy.
Macroeconomics? Isn't that incredibly boring?
No, Kevin, it's incredibly interesting. It's all about who gets what and why.
Who gets what and why? Okay, I'm in.
RadioMMT@gmail.com.
Incredibly interesting macroeconomics for the rest of us. Welcome to Radio MMT. Normally I'd say, how are you, Anne? But Anne's not in this week. She has, she's away. So I'm holding down the fort this week. And in her place, I'm hoping to speak to Karl Fitzgerald, who previously had a show on 3CR called Renegade Economist. Are you there, Karl?
Hello, Kev.
Nice to speak to you. I'm just going to give a bit of an intro to you. We're doing a show this week around housing. And Karl, you're an economist. You're also the founder and director of Grounded, and I'll get you to explain a bit about that. Formerly, you were a director of research at Prosper for 18 years and had something to do with, quite a bit to do with speculative vacancy reports, which led to a Victorian vacancy tax. And you're currently involved with community land trusts. So can you give us some background about what you're doing at the moment with these community land trusts?
Yeah, hello 3CR. Good to be back on a Friday night this time. Yeah, so Grounded is trying to bring community land trusts into play in Australia as what we call sort of the gold standard in shared equity. If you're going to share the spoils of land, then you need to make sure you do it over successive generations. And that's what a community land trust can do compared to most shared equity policies that are out there. It's really just for one buyer, and then the public subsidy is lost and government needs to spend it again. So, we're working with various community groups around Australia, trying to come together and trying to lobby local council, local philanthropic thinkers and perhaps ethical landholders who are out there who are interested in providing perpetual housing affordability.
So we're talking about, essentially we're talking about land ownership, which is, I think the idea of land ownership is obviously quite a contentious issue in this country. But how does this work? Who owns the land? Who has control over the land? And who has access to it? And how is that organised? Are we talking about a purchase of land in the sort of normal sense of the word, where somebody pays some money and somebody acquires some land? Step me through the process. How does that work?
Yeah, well, a trust is established and land is purchased on behalf of the community to be managed so that affordable outcomes are established and entrenched for people with a local connection to that land. With that, we have a purchase of the land, and in a way, it's a transition from this ownership culture and towards one of stewarding the land.
It sounds something like, if we're returning to the commons, this sort of thing, where we're
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
where there's a common ownership of land as opposed to this. We've been very geared towards private ownership of land, which I've always had an issue with. I actually bought a house with my partner back in 1992 at exactly the same time as the Mabo decision was coming down, and it got me thinking about ownership. And you own a certain amount of rights, but you don't really own the land. You've just bought rights to sort of be there and stop other people from being on it. Land essentially is a common asset, and how we manage that, how we sort of control it, is quite narrow in the way we think about things. So what you're talking about is heading back to this communal ownership of land, and it's set aside for people who otherwise can't afford to get into the private the private housing market.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the big advantages is that, from an MMT perspective, you're not actually borrowing the land from a bank or a previous owner. You're, in a way, channeling those housing payments away from the financial structures and back towards your community. So it adds this layer of resilience and the fact that we're trying to work intentionally together to make life easier. One of the big ways of doing that is having some financial ethos behind a project, so that people recognise that they're not only occupying stolen land, and I imagine would be a share of rent going back to the local Indigenous community, the traditional custodians. Over time, your payment, the rent for living on this land, would go towards more affordable housing projects. One of the criticisms of community land trusts is that you battle so hard to get government on board, you buy the land, but you don't have a plan to help expand that basis for other people in the community. So community land trusts are a really nice way that community can get agency over working together and providing more housing. That, of course, is one of the fundamental factors of CLTs, is that this land is removed from the speculative market, and from that the price growth is a lot more subtly aligned to our wages rather than this madness we face at the moment.
It sounds, well, I was going to say utopian. It's not utopian. It sounds progressive, and I suppose in the current climate, people might say it's fanciful, because we've been so geared towards private ownership of land. But what we're seeing at the moment is a divide which is becoming more and more pervasive. So we've got renters and landowners, and it used to be that you'd have access to buying property at some stage as a normal citizen. Now, I've seen in one generation that kind of access to land, which is essentially public property. Well, it's public that's been made private, but that's disintegrated. You've now got renters supporting home investors to pay off their investment, all the while being unable to build any sort of deposit for a house that they might have themselves. And that's now becoming entrenched, so that we're setting up this haves and have-nots. You either you have a property or two or three or 17, however you got. And while there's more and more people who are unable to enter the property market. So this is a situation which is going to keep growing, and it's going to get worse and worse. So what you're proposing essentially is a reversal of mindset, where we step away from this private accumulation of something that should be a home and has been turned into investment, and is set aside as a housing facility for people who otherwise can't afford to get a home loan and buy their own home.
The magnitude of failure that we're seeing in the housing market is such that even middle-class income earners are struggling to be able to purchase properties. So that's crowding out the rental market and pushing up rents. And alongside of all of the speculative pressures and the fact now that we've had, a whole generation of people transacting and turning over property and trading up and up and up. And now, 25, we're coming up 25 years of land prices more than doubling wage price growth, and the pressures are just immense. So any way we can come together and try and intervene in the market and show government that actually working together this way actually saves them a lot of money, and in a pre-distributive manner addresses problems such as loneliness, and food sovereignty, all sorts of mental health issues. Fitness comes out of living together and being around other people who want to work together, and whether that's childcare or bulk buying of goods. There's so many things we already do, but imagine if we did that in a sort of a community that had a strong economic underpinning, so that the gains were shared.
Yeah, what I'm learning and hearing more and more is that inequality is a very inefficient way to run your economy, and so the model, the economic model we're chasing at the moment, neoliberalism, is all about individuals maximising their economic potential, accumulating as much wealth as possible, and the model that is used sets up exploitation of people at the bottom, and we're seeing it in the property market at the moment, with people being in the rental market unable to find a place, or B, pay for it, which just entrenches them in that situation. And with that, as you've stated just then, comes all these inefficiencies. You have social disharmony and all the other problems that arise in a society that's unequal, that doesn't have the distribution. So the problem we've got with this is that it requires some forethought and some forward thinking. How are you going with speaking with councils, etc.? What's your progress been like? What interest have you got in this project?
Yeah, well, it's it's interesting seeing the councils that actually have a housing affordability policy. That sort of first base, and then maybe they might have a housing and a homelessness officer or something like that, and then to find councillors that are in alignment with that, and there's actually a budget to enact some of these things. We're still kind of at those sort of baby steps. This is my 20th year in housing campaigning, and it's you look at the environmental movement and how much they've achieved, and it's really inspiring, as despairing as it is. But we in the housing movement just have not been able to challenge so thoroughly the sort of bedrock of Western democracy, of private property ownership as being sacrosanct. And what we're talking about is, if you want public interest outcomes, then you need to recognise that there is a public role in the world of property. And probably the easiest way to understand that is that if no one lived in Melbourne, the price of land would plummet. But of course, as soon as the community comes back, that demand is there, and the value of land skyrockets again. So, land price is community created, and you speak to any economist of note, and neoliberal or not, you should be able to get them to admit that the earth was created. We're all born onto the earth as equals, but somehow over the last 100 odd years since we moved from classical to neoclassical economics, that's when the power of neocolonialists was exaggerated by hiding this very primal nature of people coming together and creating communities that deliver incredible benefit for those. We don't call them land owners, we call them land holders. And those land holders have an incredible privilege. we must remember that, every time we hear that the oil industry is the biggest industry in the world, no, the defence industry, they're the biggest industry. The banking industry, that you put all of, Australia's leading companies together in the ASX 200, and, the value of land is about 4 times greater than all of the most powerful companies in Australia.
It's an interesting way to put it. I have a problem with this whole thing about land increasing in value the whole time, and there's quite a bit that goes into this. If you have banks that are constantly lending against a house that's the same house, but more and more money becomes available to push the price of that house up, then banks have a responsibility to some degree to stop that from happening. But they're not incentivized to do that at all. They're quite the opposite. The larger the loan, the larger the profit for the bank, and they're profit driven. I'll put something to you and be interested in your feedback. For me, it seems that banking is a gateway for government to allow loans, which is if you want a loan, banks have an arrangement with the Reserve Bank of Australia to create a loan, and what they have to do is check out a customer and see whether they're creditworthy, and if they're creditworthy, they are eligible for a loan. Now, the loan has its basis, has its foundation in that bank's relationship with the Reserve Bank of Australia. We've been fed the misconception that loans come from depositors' savings, and that's what banks are loaning out. They're not. They're loaning out. Their loans are underpinned by their relationship with the Reserve Bank of Australia. The Reserve Bank of Australia is the national currency issuer. It's an arm of government. So we've got government using organisations, private banks, to vet customers to see whether they're eligible for a loan, and that's driven by profit. To me, that's extremely problematic because it's going to distort the market. And then you add to that all of the policies by the government to encourage home investment over home ownership. And they've set up a system which is unequal and is divisive and is going to have and have-nots. To my way of thinking, if the government is that involved in setting the system up, it has an obligation to anybody who is not eligible for a bank loan to provide some form of housing for them. It's a social responsibility, but that doesn't seem to be well regarded or well received at the moment. Have you got any feedback on that? Anything you'd like to comment about that?
Well, the biggest underwriter of the money supply are land values. If land prices even hint at falling, banks are freaking out behind closed doors. For developers, they're going to be quickly on the phone saying, look, if you let land prices fall, you're going to have to pay a margin call on that. So do not drop the price of that land. So instead of this much heralded land supply, this housing supply, they are encouraged to go on holiday and wait for interest rates to drop far enough and immigration to rise, and just maybe a bit of a wage rise, and then prices will keep rising northward. And that's the sort of story that's been going on for the last 20, 30 years in particular at an extenuated level, but it's been part of the practice, going back to the early 1900s, if not before that. Land would be rationed according to, what Labor couldn't quite afford, and they would be forced to go and deal with the banks and forced out of this system of independence, of being able to look after oneself and one family by being able to have enough time to grow some food and maybe trade with some neighbours. Yeah, the whole system with the enclosure of land was to really have a system that had delivered some freedom, but not enough that the people could actually work out that, the same feudal overlords, and that structure continued into the modern era.
Dangling false hope whilst at the same time keeping you in the hamster wheel, having a goal there that you might one day be able to achieve something, but never quite getting there. It seems to be a constant dynamic in the.
One of the stories that really spells this out most clearly is in the horrors of early colonialism. New South Wales had bonded a convict-based economy with plenty of those emancipated to help bring the local economy together. Victoria was kind of, free settlers trying to bring this new land in. But then over in South Australia, they had the Wakefield Plan, where they gave free passage to anyone who was of a suitable age and origin to come to Adelaide, and there they would sell the price of land at a price that was too high for local labourers to be able to afford, but was high enough to ensure that these immigrants would go and work for the local gentry. There was actually an analysis that showed that it was cheaper as a measure of labour to have these free settlers shipped over for free than to have convict labour in New South Wales. That sort of trend has been maintained, and that culture is well known at the upper echelons, and it's just a pity that the everyday person would, is so busy playing the Monopoly board game that they can't see that they're being played by monopolists.
Yeah, they're trapped in the system and kept too busy to actually sit back and have a look at it. Which I guess is your role and my role and our role is to keep these conversations going. It might feel like not much is happening, but if we don't keep at least some glimmer, some sort of embers burning of this conversation, then it goes out. And there are new ideas required, better ways of doing things, and it sounds to me like you've been involved in this conversation for quite some time, which is hats off to you. That's fantastic, Karl. Look, it's nice to hear about what you've been up to. I'm going to do a bit more research on Grounded. It sounds like a very interesting organisation. You were talking about the CLTs, which were the community land trusts. That sounds like an interesting concept. We're going to need better ideas than what we've got at the moment, because the current ideas are not heading in the right direction. And who knows how long it'll take. It'll take as long as it takes, I guess. But so long as there's people like yourself out there pushing these ideas, there at least is some hope. So thank you, Karl.
Yeah, no worries, Kev. Well, keep an eye around Dalesford. It's up near where I live these days, the Central Highlands, and trying to put some of these lofty concepts into play. So, yes, lots of good community members up here who have been struck by, the Airbnb bombshell that's wiping out so many of our most, treasured communities where people have created tourism hotspots. And unfortunately, there's millions of dollars leaving these communities every week through Airbnb royalties paid out.
That's a real shame. It's like you can see how things could be, and you see how things are, and it sounds like you're in an area where people are looking outside the square and have got some new progressive ideas, which maybe not so new. Good luck with your project up there, Karl.
Thanks, Kev. Good
okay, catch you around. See ya. That was Karl Fitzgerald, who is working for an organisation called Grounded. He is looking at community land trusts, which is a collective way for communities to set up affordable housing for their communities. It's a problem which is growing, and Karl is on board trying to find solutions. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back to the second half of the show, where I'm just going to have a bit of a general discussion about life, the universe, and everything from an MMT perspective. You're on Radio MMT. Speak to you soon.
This is Bill Mitchell. You're listening to my favourite Melbourne radio station, 3CR, with Anne and Kev. Great program, great guests.
You're on Radio MMT, just with Kevin this week. Anne's taken off. She's somewhere else. She's probably wallowing on a beach somewhere, having a fantastic time. Leave me here in cold Melbourne to do the show, which is fine now. 3CR's Radiothon, the dates for the Radiothon are between the 10th and the 16th of June. But you can always donate any time you like. You can always subscribe or donate. Help out with the station here. It does require money in this capitalist system we have to exist. I prefer that it wasn't. I prefer that it was a lovely, cashless, money-free society, and we could just do this off our own backs. But we can't. We're trapped in the system, so we need your help. What I think would work well is if anybody who is listening can contribute a small amount. If everybody threw in $5, $10, $20, everybody who's listening to the show, we'd be sweet. That's all we need. If you're in a position to give more, that would be terrific. You can contact the station via the website, 3cr.org. You'll find us. Keep it in mind, Radiothon is coming, and we will require your help to keep this station on the air. Now, what I'd like to speak about in the second half of this show is it's the concept of money and where money comes from. And we've talked about this quite a bit on this show. Money is created in one of two ways. It's spent into the economy via the federal government. Every time the government spends into the economy, that money goes into the economy. If it has a building project or welfare payments, etc., that's the government spending into the economy, and that money then enters the economy. The other way that money is created is through private banks lending, and we were talking about this previously with Karl. So banks, when they lend money, it's because they have a relationship with the Reserve Bank of Australia. They're not lending out people's savings, they're lending out reserves that are backed by the Reserve Bank of Australia. And one thing we need to note is that every dollar that is in existence came from the Reserve Bank of Australia. So this whole idea that money is a private thing is, it's just not true. You can see it. You take out any sort of old bill that you might have in your wallet, it'll say Reserve Bank of Australia. Every time you get a payment from the federal government, it comes from the Reserve Bank of Australia. So we know where money comes from. It comes from the Reserve Bank of Australia, and it's either through government spending or it's through banks loaning. And I say that with parenthesis because they're not really loaning money. They are gatekeeping your ability to have money put into your account ahead of you earning it. It's a time shift it time shifts your ability to pay for typically something like a house or a car that you don't have the money for yourself. Banks act as a gatekeeper with their relationship with the government to allow that to happen. Now, this was sitting on my mind for quite some time, and I was trying to figure it out because something didn't add up. And what occurred to me was that when a bank so-called loans you some money, let's say they lend you $100,000 for something, you then pay back $100,000. So that money goes into the economy. It's created by the bank with its relationship with the Reserve Bank of Australia. It goes into the economy, but then you as the lender pay it back. And at the end of that transaction, it zeroes out. There's no money left in the economy. Not only that, you need to pay interest on that loan, so you need to find money from somewhere else to service the interest on that loan. Now, I think where it gets confusing is that there are so many loans happening over such amount of time that it gets this big tangle of loans and you can't really figure out what's going on. But just to simplify it, if the only way of creating money was private banks creating loans, there would never be enough money in the system to pay the interest, let alone for anybody to have savings or make profit. So if you simply remove the government spending into the economy and you isolate it and you say, okay, well, there's two ways money go into the economy. The second way is with bank loans. If that was the only source of money creation in the economy, it would be like a Ponzi scheme. Eventually it would collapse because it's making a requirement on the economy that it can't fulfill. It's charging interest on loans, and as each loan is paid back and cancelled out, there's nothing left to pay interest. Yet we know that interest is paid, and we know that the system hasn't collapsed, and so that money has to have come from somewhere. And the only other place that money is created in the economy is when the government spends into the economy. Now, we're told that governments are supposed to run balanced budgets, that whatever they spend into the economy, just like the banks, they're supposed to tax back out again and balance their books. That's called a balanced budget. So that's the classic line that we're told is that governments are spending beyond their means and they need to pay back. They need to collect in tax whatever they've paid into the economy to balance their books. But the problem with that is, well, they don't. Governments run consistent deficits. So if you're wondering where the money to pay interest on loans or for savings comes from, there's only one place it could have come from, which is government deficits. And so by that simple analysis, and I've run this past a couple of people, some of them, well, far more knowledgeable than myself, and they say that this holds water. This is a sound analysis. And not only that, it was also described by Kalecki, a Polish economist back in the 1930s. But unfortunately, he spoke Polish and nobody cottoned on to him. But they are hearing him now. So with that understanding, what we can see is that anybody who has savings, anybody who is doing well in the economy, is doing well because they have accessed public money, which is to say government deficits, and it's ended up in their accounts. So the whole thing about private wealth and people working hard for their money and saving up and they deserve this and they deserve that, it's not really like that. It's a communal public fund that economy is. Everybody's part of it. And what we tend to do in the current system is have a system where the haves exploits the have-nots. And we've talked about this earlier with the rental market, where people are now getting trapped into becoming renters without any hope of being able to leave that and become a homeowner. It used to be that there was some sort of balance in it. House prices weren't so exorbitant that even as a renter you could afford eventually to save some sort of a deposit and purchase a house. And that used to be able to be done on one income, and then it was two incomes, and now it's just becoming impossible. So with this understanding that savings in the economy come from it's public money, it belongs to all of us. It then begs the question: what responsibility does the government, which is the representative of the people, this is a democracy that we live in, where we elect these people to look after us, etc. If public money is out there and it's being so polarised in its distribution, it just seems to me that there needs to be more accountability for government, which represents the people, for a more equitable distribution. And it's being totally ignored in the current system because of the misinformation about government deficits being something which needs to be paid back in the debt and deficit of the future for our kids and the rest of it. It doesn't make any sense. When you go through the analysis, and we were talking about this in a previous show, what is MMT? MMT lifts the bonnet on the engine, on the engine of the economy, and shows you how it works. And when you realise that deficits are absolutely necessary for an economy to survive, that if you paid back the government debt, you would collapse the economy and would have to start again fresh, which is, to me, not a bad idea. But it would mean completely dismantling the current system. It's sort of... It rearranges your thinking. Anyway, look, normally I speak to Anne, but today she's not here. And if I want to get any feedback, maybe you could send me a text and I could have a look at it. I might play another song in a second. And if you want to text me with any feedback on this idea, you can text me on 0418 538 000. I'll say that again, 0418 538 000. Send me a text about anything you've heard on the show today or anything you might think of at all. And if I get a chance, we might have a bit of a conversation about that instead. It's nice to bounce off some other people's ideas. That's how I work best.
Get ready to add your support during our annual Radiothon.
Sound on for solidarity.
3CR Radiothon Fundraiser, June 2024.
To donate, call 039419 8377 or donate online at 3cr.org.au.
3CR Radiothon 2024.
Sound on for solidarity.
You listen to Radio MMT with just Kevin this week. I asked for any questions coming in, and I've had one here. I had a couple, but the one that I want to address is tax. We're talking about what's the purpose of taxation from an MMT perspective. If governments don't need tax to pay for government spending, what's it for? It holds a couple of functions. One is to enforce the currency, essentially. Taxes are only received by the government in Australian dollars in Australia. Therefore, you need Australian dollars to pay the tax. So you have to deal with Australian dollars. So it's a way of enforcing the currency on a population, which is not a bad thing, because if you had a whole bunch of different currencies, things could get quite confusing, quite complicated. So by having one single currency, there's advantages to that. The issue I have with taxation is how much tax should you pay, and how should you pay it. At the moment, we have income tax, which is fairly onerous, especially if you're on a low income. So personal income tax, basically, we just pay it unquestioningly because it's heavily enforced by the government. But we also pay GST. So if GST is paid on everything, whoever's collecting the dollars from selling something has to pay GST to the government. That has to be paid in Australian dollars. So it would appear to me that GST could serve the function of enforcing the currency. So how much income tax should people pay? This has been a bugbear of mine for quite some time. If you're a business, any expense that you have is tax deductible. If you pay rent, if you pay energy, all the things that you need to run your business, they're tax deductible, because if you had to pay tax on all those things, the business would find it hard to survive. Yet as private citizens, we're not allowed to deduct rent or energy or even travelling to and from work as a tax deduction. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. To me, what this is doing is you're keeping people in poverty, especially if they're on a 5-figure income. When the government charges you tax, any savings you have are chewed up in taxation, and you can't get ahead. What's the point of that? The government doesn't need it to pay for their spending. Why would they be so, cruel to low-income earners to take money from them that they need, that would help an economy progress if they could spend it? And at the same time, they keep on giving tax deductions to people who are rich. It's completely the wrong way around. They should be taxing the rich more to flatten society so that we don't have this inequality and these peaks and troughs. And to my mind, I think anybody who's earning less than $75,000 is probably not going to have a lot of money left over. Tax-free threshold should be risen to $75,000. That's a line I've been running with for quite some time. Anybody who knows any of my past association with the Australian Workers' Party, etc., will know that was a policy we put through quite some time ago. So taxation becomes interesting, and I think it's a conversation that MMTers need to start having. We just sort of blindly accept income tax because we have to, because it's so heavily enforced. And we talk about taxing the rich more to flatten out society, but we don't. I think we need to spend more time talking about how much people below $75,000, I'm nominating that figure, how much tax they should be paying. I'm saying that the tax-free threshold should be raised to $75,000 because if you earn $75,000 these days, I don't think you're going to have much change left after expenses and being a normal contributor in society. Now, I understand that a lot of people earn a lot less than that and that things are hard. But if you want to be a functional member of society, if you want to be able to socialise, to interact, to maintain a level of connection with the rest of society, these are things that should be promoted, but they're not. They're squashed because it's like the government is siding with business and keeping people in their hamster wheel, so they have to keep on working to pay their tax or pay their loan or pay this or pay that, so they can never get ahead, so they have to keep on working. That is something which I think needs a bit of a look at. Anyway, we're running out of time. Mafalda's coming up next, and I need to clear out of the way. Thank you for listening to us this week, and we'll be back for the next show. And enjoy your weekend, and thank you for listening to Radio MMT.
You've been listening to Radio MMT with Anne and Kev.
We'd love your feedback. Email us on radiommt@gmail.com or search Radio MMT on social media.
Listen to this show anytime, wherever you get your podcasts, or on 3cr.org.au/Radio MMT.
Support this show and the station by subscribing to 3cr.org.au and mention Radio MMT.
We thank all our guests.
And we thank economist Professor Bill Mitchell and his mmted.org, educating the masses on modern monetary theory.
And thank you to our listening listeners for listening. And I thank you, Kevin.
And I thank you, Anne. So what's planned for next week?
Kevin, there is still so much to talk about. We've got to expose all this rotten economics.
Well, no, that's good, and I get it. Do you reckon we could use a bit more music?
Well, I made a list of all these terrible economic theories. Like, have you heard of the theory of comparative advantage, or the quantity theory of money, or the loanable funds theory?
Have you heard of a band called Single Gun Theory? Like, they're a really good band. I'm sure there's a whole range of like macroeconomic music that I could bring into the show.
Yeah, but we really need to do marginal productivity theory, not to mention the natural rate of unemployment and the money multiplier.
You've got a pretty good singing voice. I play bass. Bill, he plays guitar. I reckon we could form a macroeconomics band. Like, we could deliver this whole message by music.
Well, we could call the band the permanent income hypothesis, or the Ricardian equivalence, or rational expectations.
I think we're onto something here. We're trying to make macroeconomics more interesting.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.